Blood on a crisp white shirt always tells a story. Sarah just wanted to finish her double shift, count her tips, and pay her rent. She never expected her violently possessive ex to corner her in the dimly lit dining room after closing, and Kyle, reeking of cheap whiskey and entitlement, definitely didn't expect that the quiet man nursing a scotch in the corner booth was Dominic Russo. You don't lay a hand on what belongs to the boss, especially when he's watching. Neon light from the street sign outside bled through the horizontal blinds, painting sharp red lines across the mahogany bar. Sarah dragged a damp rag over the wood, pressing hard enough to make her knuckles ache. It was 1:15 a.m. on a Tuesday, the kind of hour where the glamour of an upscale downtown lounge dissolved into the smell of stale citrus, spilled gin, and bleach. Her feet throbbed, a dull, rhythmic pulse inside her cheap black flats that she had stopped noticing hours ago. Survival in this city meant ignoring a lot of things. Pain was just the baseline. Only one customer remained. Booth 4 sat in the deepest pocket of shadows at the back of the room. The man occupying it had been coming in for exactly 2 weeks. He never brought a guest. He never ordered food. He drank one neat Macallan over the course of an hour, left a folded $100 bill under the glass, and walked out into the rain without a word. Sarah didn't know his name. She knew the cut of his charcoal suits cost more than her annual salary, and she knew the silence that hung around him was heavy, deliberate, and entirely unbothered. He didn't look at his phone. He just watched the room. Sarah tossed the rag into the sink beneath the counter and leaned against the cold stainless steel. She closed her eyes for a fraction of a second, just long enough to breathe. Then came the sound. A sharp, metallic rattling at the front entrance. Someone was grabbing the brass handles of the heavy glass doors and pulling violently against the deadbolt. Sarah's eyes snapped open. The red neon sign illuminated the silhouette on the other side of the glass. The slump of the shoulders, the aggressive tilt of the head. Her stomach dropped. It felt like swallowing a stone. Kyle. He hammered a closed fist against the reinforced glass. The dull thud echoed through the cavernous, empty restaurant. Sarah froze. A sudden cold sweat broke across her neck. She had changed her number 3 times. She had moved to a cramped studio in a neighborhood where the streetlights didn't work just to disappear. It had been 4 months since she packed a single duffel bag while he was passed out on the couch and ran. 4 months of looking over her shoulder. 4 months of flinching every time a car backfired or a door slammed too hard. He hit the glass again, harder this time. "Sarah!" His voice was muffled, but unmistakable. The whining, demanding pitch of a man who believed the world owed him an apology for his own mistakes. "I see you in there. Open the door." She stayed perfectly still behind the bar, hoping the shadows would swallow her. If she didn't engage, he usually gave up. That was the rule. Engagement was fuel for him. But Kyle wasn't acting by the old rules tonight. He stumbled back from the doors and looked around the side of the building. The service alley. Panic spiked in her chest. The service door wasn't locked. The busboy, Tommy, had taken the trash out 5 minutes ago and always propped it open with a cinder block because the latch stuck. "No," Sarah whispered. She abandoned her post, hurrying out from behind the bar, her rubber-soled shoes squeaking against the polished hardwood. She rushed toward the kitchen double doors, pushing through them just as the heavy metal security door at the back of the kitchen groaned open. Kyle stood in the threshold. Rain dripped from his unkempt hair, flattening it against his forehead. His leather jacket was soaked, smelling of wet dog and the sharp, sour tang of cheap alcohol. He looked pathetic. 2 years ago, she would have felt a pang of sympathy. Now she only felt a deep, exhausting dread. Tommy locked the front, Kyle slurred, stepping into the kitchen and kicking the cinder block away. The heavy metal door slammed shut behind him with a finality that made Sarah flinch. "Kyle, you can't be here," Sarah said, keeping her voice low and even. "We're closed. You need to leave." "I need to leave?" He let out a harsh, barking laugh, wiping a hand across his wet mouth. He took a step forward, his boots leaving muddy prints on the pristine tile. "You ghost me for 4 months, make me look like a damn fool, and tell me to leave? I didn't ghost you. I left. There's a difference." She backed up slowly, keeping a stainless steel preps table between them. "I'm working. If you don't go, I'm going to call the police." "Call them." Kyle slammed his hands down on the metal table. The sound cracked like a gunshot in the empty kitchen. "Call them, Sarah. Tell them your boyfriend came to see you." "Ex-boyfriend," she corrected, her voice trembling, despite her best efforts to keep it flat. He hated that. The correction. His eyes narrowed, the familiar, ugly darkness settling into his features. It was the look he got right before things broke. Plates, chairs, her spirit. "You think you're so much better than me now," Kyle sneered, moving around the edge of the table. "Working in a place like this? Serving drinks to snobs? You're nothing without me. You're a mess. I came here to forgive you. And this is how you treat me." Sarah took another step back, her heel hitting the swinging door that led back out to the main dining room. "I don't want your forgiveness, Kyle. I want you to go away. Please." "Stop telling me what to do," he roared. He lunged. It was sloppy, driven by rage and liquor, but he was bigger than her. Much bigger. He caught her forearm before she could slip backward through the door. His fingers dug into her skin, instantly bruising. Sarah gasped, twisting her arm, but his grip was like a vice. He jerked her forward, hauling her through the swinging doors and out into the dim light of the main restaurant. She stumbled, her knees hitting the hardwood floor, dragging her across the threshold. "Let go of me!" she cried out, hitting his arm with her free hand. Kyle didn't let go. He pulled her up roughly by the fabric of her uniform shirt, tearing the collar. "You're coming with me. We're going home, and you're going to sit down and listen to me." Sarah thrashed, kicking out, her shoe connecting with his shin. Kyle swore viciously. He raised his free hand, balling it into a fist. Sarah squeezed her eyes shut, turning her head away, her muscles locking in anticipation of the impact she knew was coming. She waited for the pain, but the blow never landed. The silence that followed was absolute. Sarah kept her eyes squeezed shut for a long second, her breath catching in her throat. The crushing grip on her arm suddenly vanished. Kyle's heavy, labored breathing hitched, replaced by a strange, strangled, choking sound. She opened her eyes. Kyle wasn't looking at her anymore. He was up on his tiptoes, his face flushed a mottled, ugly purple. A hand, immaculate, steady, and wearing a platinum watch that caught the neon light, was wrapped tightly around the back of Kyle's neck. Dominic Russo stood directly behind him. Sarah hadn't heard him move. She hadn't heard his footsteps on the hardwood. It was as if the shadows in booth 4 had simply detached themselves and materialized in the center of the room. Dominic's face was completely devoid of emotion. His dark eyes didn't hold anger or outrage. They were flat, cold, and assessing. He looked at Kyle the way a man might look at a cockroach he was about to step on, not out of malice, but out of necessity. "You're disrupting her shift," Dominic said. His voice was a low, resonant baritone. It didn't boom. It didn't echo. It simply cut through the air, carrying an undeniable weight of authority. Kyle grabbed desperately at the wrist, pinning his neck, his boots scuffing against the floor as he tried to find leverage. "Get off me!" he spat, saliva flying from his lips. "Who the hell are you? This is none of your business, man." Dominic tilted his head a fraction of an inch. "Everything in this room is my business." He didn't wind up. He didn't throw a dramatic punch. Dominic simply shifted his weight and swept his leg beneath Kyle's knees. At the same time, his hand on Kyle's neck drove downward with brutal, calculated force. Kyle hit the hardwood floor with a sickening, heavy thud. The breath left his lungs in a violent rush. Before he could even register the impact, Dominic stepped smoothly over him, pinning Kyle's right arm to the floor beneath a highly polished Italian leather shoe. Sarah backed away, her hands shaking as she pulled the torn edges of her collar together. Her heart battered against her ribs. She couldn't look away. Kyle groaned, trying to thrash his way out from under the shoe, his left hand reaching up to grab Dominic's leg. Dominic simply applied more pressure. A sharp, distinct crack echoed in the quiet room. Kyle screamed. It was a raw, agonizing sound that tore through his throat. His right arm lay at an unnatural angle, the wrist bone shattered beneath Dominic's heel. Kyle curled in on himself, sobbing, clutching his broken arm to his chest as Dominic calmly removed his foot. "Do not scream in here," Dominic said quietly. Kyle clamped his mouth shut, whimpering through his teeth, his eyes wide with a sudden, primitive terror. He finally realized this wasn't a bar fight. This wasn't a scuffle with a bouncer. The man standing over him wasn't trying to win an argument. Dominic knelt down, his slacks pulling taut over his thighs. He rested his forearms on his knees, leaning in close to Kyle's sweating face. "Listen to me carefully," Dominic murmured, his voice so quiet Sarah had to strain to hear it. "You are going to stand up. You are going to walk out that front door. You are going to get in your car, or you are going to walk. I don't care. But if you ever come within 5 miles of this building again, if you ever look in her direction, speak her name, or cast a shadow on the pavement she walks on, I won't break your wrist. I will remove you. Entirely. Do you understand?" Kyle couldn't speak. He just nodded frantically, tears mixing with the rainwater on his face, his chest heaving with silent, terrified sobs. "Get out!" Dominic stood up, turning his back on the man entirely. It was the ultimate display of dominance. He didn't even consider Kyle a threat worth watching. Kyle scrambled to his feet, slipping on his own wet footprints, clutching his shattered wrist. He didn't look back. He hit the push bar of the front doors with his good shoulder, bursting out into the heavy rain and disappearing into the darkness of the street. The heavy glass doors swung shut, the latch clicking into place. The silence returned, thicker this time. Sarah stood frozen by the bar. Her breathing was shallow. She watched Dominic reach into his jacket pocket, pull out a pristine white linen handkerchief, and casually wipe a spot of moisture off his hands. He folded it neatly and put it back. Then he turned to look at her. Sarah braced herself. She was used to men wanting something in return for a favor. She was used to the debt that immediately followed an act of protection. Dominic studied her for a long moment. He took in her torn collar, the red marks already blossoming on her pale wrist, the way she was holding herself together by sheer willpower. His eyes softened, just a fraction. The cold, clinical killer vanished, replaced by something grounded and quietly observant. "Are you injured?" he asked. The tone was formal, polite. "No," Sarah managed to say, her voice cracking slightly. She cleared her throat and tried again. "No, I'm okay." Dominic nodded slowly. He didn't offer a platitude. He didn't tell her it was going to be all right. He simply accepted her answer. He walked past her, stopping at booth 4. He picked up his empty glass, carried it to the bar, and set it down gently in front of her. Then he reached into his wallet, pulled out another $100 bill, and laid it flat on the mahogany. "You should lock the back door, Sarah," he said quietly. He walked to the front entrance, pushed the doors open, and stepped out into the rain. Sarah stared at the space he had just occupied, the crisp $100 bill resting on the bar, and realized with a slow, creeping certainty that her life had just irrevocably changed. He knew her name. Rain lashed against the bedroom window, sounding like handfuls of gravel thrown against the cheap, single-pane glass. Sarah lay on her back in the dark, staring at the faint yellow glow cast by the street lamp outside. She hadn't slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard the sickening, hollow crack of Kyle's wrist breaking. She felt the ghost of his heavy, suffocating grip on her arm. But mostly, she saw the cold, detached expression on Dominic Russo's face as he systematically dismantled a man who had terrorized her for 2 years. Morning arrived with the harsh blare of her alarm clock. Sarah dragged herself out of bed, her body aching with the deep, heavy fatigue of an adrenaline crash. She walked into the tiny, cramped bathroom and turned on the fluorescent light. The bulb flickered, buzzing like an angry hornet. She inspected her right arm. The bruise was already blooming, a harsh, mottled ring of purple and black just above her wrist, mapping out the exact placement of Kyle's fingers. She pressed her thumb gently against the darkest part of the bruise. It hurt, a sharp, grounding pain. It was real. Last night wasn't a stress-induced hallucination. Survival instincts, honed over 32 years of hard lessons, told her to run again. If a man like Kyle was dangerous, a man like Dominic Russo was apocalyptic. You didn't attract the attention of a man who shattered bones without raising his heart rate and expect a fairy tale ending. Men with that kind of casual, localized power always collected on their debts. The $100 bill he had left on the bar felt less like a tip and more like a down payment. Yet, as she rode the crowded, rattling subway to her evening shift, a strange, uncomfortable feeling settled in her chest. For the first time in 4 months, she wasn't scanning the faces of the passengers for a familiar, angry jawline. She wasn't plotting her exit strategy at every stop. The crushing, suffocating weight of Kyle's impending arrival had vanished, replaced by the terrifying, quiet gravity of Dominic's presence. The restaurant was busy that night. Thursday crowds were always loud, demanding, and utterly oblivious to the ghosts haunting the staff. Sarah moved through the motions on autopilot. She mixed martinis, wiped down the polished mahogany, and smiled at businessmen who looked right through her. Paul, the floor manager, paced behind the bar, complaining about food costs and a late liquor delivery. He was a nervous, sweating man who lived in constant fear of upper management. He had no idea violence had stained his pristine dining room less than 24 hours ago. He didn't know Tommy the busboy had mopped up blood near the kitchen door. Sarah kept her mouth shut. Spooking Paul would only lose her the shifts she desperately needed. By 10 o'clock, the crowd began to thin out. Sarah found her eyes drifting toward the back of the room, scanning the shadows. Booth 4 remained empty. A ridiculous, irrational pang of disappointment flared in her chest. She crushed it instantly, mocking her own stupidity. What did she expect? That a man in a bespoke suit who dealt in casual brutality would suddenly become a regular fixture in her life? He had removed an annoyance. That was all. At 10:45 p.m. the front doors opened. The chill of the autumn night rolled in, carrying the scent of damp asphalt and expensive cologne. Sarah didn't look up immediately, but the sudden shift in the room's atmosphere was palpable. The lingering patrons unconsciously lowered their voices. The bartender at the opposite end of the counter, stood a little straighter. Power had a frequency, and Dominic Russo broadcasted it effortlessly. He didn't go to booth 4. Instead, Dominic walked directly to the center of the bar. He unbuttoned his dark navy suit jacket with one fluid motion and took a seat on one of the leather stools. It was the most illuminated spot in the restaurant. He wasn't hiding tonight. Sarah felt her pulse kick up, a steady drumbeat in her throat. She wiped her hands on a bar towel, took a deep breath, and walked over to him. Up close, the details of his face were arresting. Sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw dusted with a faint shadow of stubble, and eyes so dark they swallowed the neon light reflecting off the bottles behind her. "McAllen." "Neat," Sarah said, keeping her voice carefully neutral. "Yes," Dominic replied softly. He didn't break eye contact. She turned around, grateful for the momentary reprieve, and poured the amber liquid into a heavy crystal glass. Her hands were steady, but her mind was racing. Why was he sitting at the bar? Why was he looking at her like he was trying to solve a complex equation? She placed the glass on a fresh napkin in front of him. "Here you go." "How is your arm, Sarah?" The question was spoken so casually, he could have been asking about the weather. But his eyes immediately dropped to her wrist. She had worn a long-sleeved undershirt to cover the bruise, pushing the sleeves down past her cuffs. "It's fine," she lied smoothly, folding her hands in front of her. "I want to thank you for last night. But I also need you to know I can't afford whatever it is you're going to ask for." Dominic took a slow sip of his scotch. He rested the glass on the bar and laced his fingers together. "You have a very transactional view of the world." "I have a realistic view," she countered, the cynicism she used as armor slipping into her tone. "Men don't break other men's bones for free. Not in this city. I don't have money, Mr. Russo. I don't have influence. I just pour drinks." A faint, almost imperceptible ghost of a smile touched the corner of his mouth. It wasn't mocking. It was genuine amusement. "You think I want payment?" It wasn't a question. "Everyone wants payment." "Kyle was a disruption," Dominic said, his voice dropping a register, meant only for her ears. "He was loud, he was sloppy, and he put his hands on something he had no right to touch. Correcting that wasn't a favor to you, Sarah. It was a matter of basic hygiene. I dislike messes in places where I drink." Sarah stared at him, trying to find the lie in his dark eyes. There wasn't one. He spoke with the terrifying sincerity of a man who truly believed the world bent to his preferences. "So that's it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "We're even?" "We were never keeping score," Dominic said quietly. He picked up his glass and held her gaze. "Breathe, Sarah. No one is hunting you anymore." Friday night brought a different kind of exhaustion. The weekend rush had been brutal, a blur of shouting tickets, spilled cocktails and demanding customers. By the time Sarah finally clocked out at 2:30 a.m., her legs felt like they were filled with wet cement. She buttoned her thin wool coat against the biting wind, shivering as she stepped out of the service alley and onto the desolate street. The city was quiet at this hour, wrapped in an eerie, damp stillness. Usually, this walk home was a calculated tactical exercise. Keys laced between her knuckles, phone in her left hand, thumb hovering over the emergency dial, eyes scanning every doorway, every parked car, every shadow that looked too deep. Tonight, she forced her hand to stay deep in her pocket. Dominic had said she wasn't being hunted. Part of her desperately wanted to believe the quiet authority in his voice. The other part, the cynical survivor that kept her alive, whispered that monsters didn't just disappear. They usually just got replaced by bigger monsters. 2 blocks from her apartment, the sound of a slow-moving engine broke the silence. Sarah's breath hitched. She didn't turn around immediately, keeping her pace steady, but her senses flared. The low hum of a heavy vehicle crawled along the asphalt behind her. It wasn't passing. It was pacing her. She tightened her grip on her pepper spray and chanced a glance over her shoulder. It was a black Lincoln Navigator, its windows tinted so dark they looked like polished obsidian. It crept along the curb, perfectly matching her brisk walking speed. The panic she thought Dominic had banished surged back, hot and acidic in her throat. Kyle wouldn't have a car like that. But Kyle had low-life friends. What if he sent someone? Sarah took a sharp left down a narrow residential side street, hoping the vehicle would continue straight. The Navigator turned with her, its headlights washing over the cracked pavement. Anger, sudden and blinding, replaced her fear. She was so damn tired of running. She was tired of shrinking away from the world. She stopped dead in her tracks, spun around, and planted her feet on the sidewalk, glaring at the approaching SUV. The Navigator eased to a halt right next to the curb. For an agonizing second, nothing happened. Then, the heavy driver's side window hummed down, revealing the interior. The man behind the wheel wasn't Kyle. He wasn't a street thug. He wore a sharp black suit and a neatly trimmed beard. His hands rested easily on the steering wheel, and he looked at her with polite, professional indifference. "Miss," he said, his voice completely devoid of threat. "It's late. The temperature is dropping. Mr. Russo requested I ensure you make it to your door securely. If you'd like a ride, the back seat is warm." Sarah stared at him, her mind struggling to process the offer. "Who are you?" "My name is Leo," he replied simply. "Did Dominic send you to follow me?" "Mr. Russo asked me to observe the route you take home and ensure there were no lingering complications from Tuesday night," Leo corrected smoothly. "I am not following you. I am providing a perimeter." "I don't need a perimeter," Sarah snapped, the adrenaline making her reckless. "I didn't ask for a bodyguard." "I am aware," Leo said, unbothered by her hostility. "I am merely fulfilling a directive. You do not have to get in the car, miss, but I will remain on this street until you are inside your building." He rolled the window back up, cutting off the conversation. Sarah stood on the sidewalk, shivering in the cold, staring at the black glass. It was maddening. It was a suffocating kind of safety. She turned on her heel and marched the rest of the way to her apartment building. True to his word, the Navigator trailed slowly behind her. It idled by the curb until she unlocked the front door, stepped inside the lobby, and the heavy deadbolt clicked shut behind her. Only then did the headlights sweep away into the night. The next evening, Sarah went to work with a singular, burning purpose. When Dominic walked in at 10:30 p.m., taking his usual spot in booth 4, she didn't wait for him to settle. She bypassed the bartender, grabbed a bottle of Macallan and a glass, and marched straight into the shadows at the back of the room. She set the glass down hard enough that it clinked sharply against the table. She poured 2 fingers of scotch, slammed the bottle down, and slid into the booth opposite him. Dominic didn't flinch. He watched her slide into the leather seat, his dark eyes tracking the defiant jut of her chin. "I am not a pet, Mr. Russo," Sarah said, keeping her voice low but laced with steel. "And I am not a project." Dominic picked up his glass. "No. You're a bartender who walks alone through a compromised neighborhood at 3 in the morning. I've walked that route for 4 months. I can take care of myself." Tuesday night suggested otherwise. The blunt truth of his words hit her like a physical blow. She wanted to argue, to throw her independence in his face, but the memory of Kyle's hands on her choked the words out. "I can't live with a shadow trailing me," Sarah said, her voice cracking slightly, the anger giving way to genuine exhaustion. "I spent the last 2 years being controlled. Who I talked to, where I went, what I wore. Kyle suffocated me. Having a black SUV follow me home, it feels like a different cage. A nicer one, maybe. But still a cage. Dominic studied her. The cold, calculating machinery behind his eyes seemed to pause. He set his drink down. The silence between them stretched, thick and heavy with unspoken things. "My world," Dominic began, his voice a low rumble that vibrated against the table, "is governed by chaos and violence. The only way I survive it is by enforcing strict, unyielding order on everything I touch. When I saw that man lay his hands on you in this room, it violated that order." He leaned forward slightly, the faint scent of cedar and gunpowder drifting across the table. "Sending Leo wasn't about controlling you, Sarah. It was about controlling the environment around you. But I hear you." He held her gaze, a deep, unsettling intensity in his eyes. "The perimeter is lifted. You walk alone. But know this, if the wolves come back to your door, there won't be anyone waiting in the street to stop them." "I'd rather face the wolves on my own terms," Sarah whispered, terrified by her own boldness. Dominic's lips curved into a faint, dangerous smile. "I believe you would. Pour me another drink, Sarah. And then go back to work." Reality always had a way of bleeding through the cracks of a peaceful facade. Sunday afternoon at the neighborhood laundromat was supposed to be Sarah's sanctuary. It smelled of industrial bleach, hot, damp lint, and stale coffee. The rhythmic, heavy sloshing of the oversized washing machines usually drowned out the frantic noise of the city, giving her 2 unbroken hours of peace. Today, the peace fractured before the rinse cycle even finished. Sarah stood at the metal folding table, pressing the wrinkles out of her black uniform shirts with the palms of her hands. She didn't notice the bell above the door chime. She didn't notice the sudden, heavy shift in the air until the fluorescent lights overhead were blocked by 2 broad silhouettes. She looked up. Her stomach contracted into a tight, cold knot. They weren't Kyle. They were worse. The man on the left was older, built like a brick wall encased in a faded canvas work jacket. His nose had been broken and reset badly at least twice. The younger man to his right was painfully thin, his eyes darting around the empty laundromat with a twitchy, chemical energy. He kept his hands buried deep in the pockets of a baggy hoodie. "You Sarah?" the older man asked. His voice sounded like it had been dragged across asphalt. Sarah didn't answer immediately. She took a slow step back, putting the metal folding table between them. Her right hand slid subtly toward the heavy plastic bottle of detergent. It wasn't a weapon, but it was heavy enough to cause damage if she threw it hard enough. "I asked you a question," the man pressed, taking a slow step forward. His heavy boots scuffed against the cheap linoleum floor. "Who's asking?" Sarah kept her voice flat, masking the violent tremor shaking her knees. "Friends of Kyle," the twitchy kid spat, pulling one hand out of his pocket to point a stained finger at her. "Though friends is a stretch right now. Kyle owes us money. A lot of it. And seeing as how he can't work construction anymore because some soot snapped his arm in half, we have a problem." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. Kyle had always been bad with money. He gambled on amateur fights, bought rounds for the bar to look like a big shot, and drained her savings account twice before she finally left him. "Kyle's debts have nothing to do with me," Sarah said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "We aren't together. We haven't been for months." "That's not what he told us," the older man said, resting his thick hands on the edge of the folding table. "Kyle says you're working at a fancy place downtown, making great tips. He also says you got yourself a new boyfriend, a heavy hitter who likes to throw his weight around. Kyle figures Since you and your new friend cost him his livelihood, you're on the hook for the 10 grand he owes us." Bile rose in the back of her throat. It was classic Kyle. Even with a shattered wrist, his first instinct was to shift the blame, to use her as a human shield against the consequences of his own disastrous choices. "I don't have $10,000, Sarah said, gripping the edge of the table so hard her knuckles turned white. "And I don't have a boyfriend. Kyle lied to you. You're wasting your time." The older man leaned forward, his eyes devoid of anything resembling empathy. "We don't waste time, sweetheart. We collect. If you don't have the cash, we take assets. And right now, you're the only asset Kyle has left." He moved fast for a big man. He lunged around the table, his massive hand reaching for her jacket. Sarah didn't freeze. The adrenaline she had been hoarding for 4 months finally detonated. She grabbed the heavy detergent bottle and swung it in a brutal, upward arc. The hard plastic caught the older man squarely on the cheekbone with a dull, sickening crack. He staggered back, swearing loudly, a hand flying to his face. The twitchy kid pulled a switchblade from his pocket, the metal clicking sharply in the harsh light. "You crazy bitch! Get out!" Sarah screamed, her voice tearing through the quiet hum of the machines. She snatched a heavy metal laundry cart and shoved it violently into the narrow aisle, creating a barricade. "I swear to God, there are cameras in here. I will scream until the cops show up." The older man recovered, spitting a wad of blood onto the floor. He stared at her, calculating the risk. A public place. Daylight. A woman who clearly wasn't going to roll over and cry. "Let's go, Ricky," he grunted, grabbing the younger man's shoulder and shoving him towards the door. He turned back to Sarah, his eyes flat and deadly. "This isn't over. You got 48 hours to figure out how to pay us. Or next, we won't try talking." The bell chimed as they shoved their way out the glass door. Sarah stood completely still until they disappeared down the street. Then her knees buckled. She sank to the dirty linoleum floor, her back against a vibrating washing machine, and pulled her knees to her chest. She was shaking so violently, her teeth rattled. Dominic had warned her. He had told her that removing the perimeter meant she was walking alone. He had told her about the wolves. She squeezed her eyes shut, fighting back the hot, angry tears. She had wanted independence. She had demanded to handle her own life. But the brutal truth was staring her in the face. She was playing by the rules of a civilized world that simply didn't exist in the dark corners where men like Kyle and his creditors operated. She needed help, and there was only one man who spoke their language. Exhaustion settled deep into Sarah's bones, a heavy, suffocating blanket that made every movement feel like walking underwater. Her Monday night shift was a blur of pouring drinks and printing receipts, her eyes constantly darting toward the front doors. Every time the brass handle turned, her heart slammed against her ribs. She kept expecting the man in the canvas jacket to walk in and demand his money. By midnight, the restaurant was practically empty. Dominic arrived at 12:15 a.m. He didn't wear a suit tonight. He wore a dark charcoal overcoat over a simple black cashmere sweater, the severe lines of his clothing highlighting the quiet, predatory grace of his movements. He walked directly to booth 4, sliding into the shadows as if he belonged to them. Sarah didn't wait for Paul to notice him. She grabbed a bottle of Macallan and a single glass, bypassing the waitress station entirely. She walked over to his booth, setting the glass down and pouring the scotch. Her hands betrayed her. The heavy crystal bottle clattered nervously against the rim of the glass. Dominic's dark eyes locked onto her trembling fingers, then drifted up to her face. He saw the pale, drawn skin. He saw the dark circles under her eyes. He read the tension vibrating in her jaw. He didn't touch his drink. "Sit down, Sarah," he commanded softly. She didn't argue. She slid into the leather booth opposite him, keeping her hands firmly planted on her lap to hide the shaking. "They came to the laundromat," Sarah said, the words spilling out before she could second-guess herself. She didn't want to sound weak, but she was out of options. 2 men. They said Kyle owes them $10,000. He told them I had it. He told them. She swallowed hard, her throat painfully dry. He told them I was sleeping with someone rich. Someone who broke his arm. Dominic's expression didn't change. Not a single muscle in his face twitched, but the air around him seemed to drop 10 degrees. The quiet, relaxed patron vanished, replaced entirely by the lethal machinery of the man beneath the cashmere. "Did they touch you?" The question was a quiet, deadly slide of steel. "No. I hit one with a bottle of detergent. They left." Sarah let out a bitter, humorless laugh. "They gave me 48 hours to get the money." Dominic leaned back against the leather cushion, his gaze fixed on her face. "You told me you didn't want a perimeter. You told me you wanted to face the wolves on your own terms. I know what I said." Sarah looked down at the polished wood of the table. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford right now. "I was wrong. I don't know how to fight men like that. I don't know how to make them stop. If I give them money, they'll just come back for more. If I run, they'll find me." She looked up, meeting his terrifyingly calm eyes. "I don't have $10,000, Mr. Russo. I don't have anything to offer you. But I am asking for your help." Dominic studied her in silence. The restaurant around them faded into a dull, meaningless hum. He wasn't looking at her with pity. He was looking at her with a profound, unsettling respect. She had tried to stand on her own. She had taken a swing at a threat, and when she realized she was outmatched, she had the pragmatic intelligence to seek a superior force. "You don't owe me money, Sarah," Dominic said, his voice a low, resonant rumble. "And I don't want your money." "Then what do you want?" "Order." Dominic picked up his glass, holding the amber liquid up to the dim light. "Kyle introduced chaos into your life. Now, his creditors are introducing chaos into mine by threatening a woman I have chosen to take an interest in." Sarah's breath hitched. "A woman I have chosen to take an interest in." The words were possessive, clinical, and yet deeply intimate. "I can fix this," Dominic continued, setting the glass down. He leaned across the table, closing the physical distance between them. "I can make it so these men never remember your name. I can make sure Kyle never breathes a word about you to another living soul. I can eradicate the threat entirely." He paused, ensuring she was listening to every single syllable. "But you need to understand the mechanics of my world, Sarah. If I handle this, it won't be a conversation. It won't be a stern warning like I gave your ex. If I step in, I will dismantle them. Brutally. And permanently." He held her gaze, demanding she face the reality of what she was asking for. "I am not a good man," Dominic said quietly. "I am a necessary evil. If you ask me to protect you, I will. But you will be pulling a monster out of the dark, and once I step between you and the rest of the world, I am not stepping back." Sarah stared at him. Her heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She thought of Kyle's suffocating control, driven by insecurity and rage. Dominic was offering something entirely different. He was offering absolute destruction of her enemies, born from cold, calculated possession. It was terrifying. It was damnation. And she was so incredibly tired of being afraid. Sarah looked at the man sitting across from her. She looked at his expensive clothes, his steady hands, and the unyielding, dark promise in his eyes. "Then handle it," Sarah whispered. "Destroy them." Rain returned to the city on Tuesday, washing the pavement in a cold, grey drizzle. Sarah sat on the edge of her mattress, staring at the digital clock on her nightstand. The red numbers flipped to 2:12 p.m. 48 hours. The deadline the men at the laundromat had given her was officially gone. Silence filled her tiny apartment. She waited for a knock at the door. She waited for the sound of heavy boots in the hallway. Nothing happened. The radiator clanked rhythmically in the corner, and a police siren wailed 2 avenues over, fading into the ambient noise of downtown. Waiting for violence was a specific kind of torture. It gnawed at the lining of your stomach and made your skin feel too tight. Sarah hadn't slept. She had spent the last 2 days oscillating between numb disbelief and sharp, blinding panic. She had asked Dominic Russo to destroy 2 men. She had looked a killer in the eye and given him permission to unchain himself on her behalf. By 4 p.m., she couldn't take the suffocating confines of her apartment anymore. She threw on her coat, grabbed her keys, and walked out into the damp chill. She didn't have a shift until 6, but moving felt safer than sitting still. She walked the 6 blocks to the restaurant with her head on a swivel. Every canvas jacket made her pulse spike. Every idling car made her breath hitch. But the streets remained aggressively normal. People rushed past her with umbrellas, arguing on cell phones, entirely oblivious to the invisible war she felt she was walking through. When she reached the service alley behind the restaurant, she finally saw him. Leo leaned casually against the brick wall next to the heavy metal kitchen door. He wore a dark raincoat, his hands buried deep in the pockets. He didn't look like a thug waiting in an alley. He looked like a bored executive waiting for a town car. Sarah stopped, her boots splashing softly in a shallow puddle. Leo pushed himself off the wet brick and reached into his coat. He didn't pull a weapon. He pulled out a small, thick manila envelope and held it out toward her. "Mr. Russo sends his regards," Leo said, his voice flat and perfectly polite. Sarah stared at the envelope like it might detonate. She took a hesitant step forward and grabbed it. The paper felt heavy, damp from the misty rain. She opened the metal clasp with shaking fingers and tipped the contents into her palm. A cheap plastic flip phone slid out, along with a stack of folded papers. "What is this?" she asked, her voice cracking. "The paperwork is the original marker Kyle signed with his creditors," Leo explained, barely blinking as the rain hit his face. "If you check the bottom of the second page, you'll see the debt has been marked paid in full. The signatures are a bit rushed, but they are legally binding in the circles that matter." Sarah unfolded the papers. It was a crude, handwritten contract detailing a $10,000 loan with extortionate interest rates. At the very bottom, scrawled in a frantic, jagged hand, were the words "debt cleared," null and void, followed by 2 messy signatures. A dark, rust-colored smudge stained the corner of the page. It looked entirely too much like dried blood. She felt a wave of nausea roll through her, followed instantly by a terrifying, profound wave of relief. "And the phone," she whispered, looking at the cheap plastic device in her hand. "Press play on the screen," Leo instructed. Sarah flipped the phone open. There was only one file saved on the home screen, an audio recording. She pressed the central button. Static hissed from the tiny speaker, followed by the sound of a harsh, scraping breath. Then Kyle's voice filled the alley. It didn't sound demanding or aggressive. It sounded hollow, shredded by raw, unadulterated panic. "Sarah, I'm leaving. I'm on a bus, heading west. I'm not coming back. I swear to God, I will never come back. Just tell him I understood. Please, tell him I'm gone." The recording clicked off. Sarah stared at the phone. For 2 years, Kyle's voice had been the soundtrack to her anxiety. He had been a towering, immovable force in her life. Now, reduced to a trembling recording on a burner phone, he sounded incredibly small. He sounded broken. "Where is he?" she asked, looking up at Leo. "On a bus heading west," Leo answered smoothly. He was highly motivated to relocate. Mr. Russo felt it was cleaner this way. He doesn't like loose ends. "And the 2 men from the laundromat?" Leo's expression shifted. Just a fraction. A cold, professional emptiness settled over his features. They decided on a sudden career change. They won't be collecting debts in this city ever again. Their operation has been permanently liquidated. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. The finality in his tone left absolutely no room for doubt. Dominic had promised to eradicate the threat, and he had delivered with terrifying efficiency. "Mr. Russo will expect you at his table tonight," Leo added, turning away to walk down the alley. "Have a good shift, miss." Sarah watched him disappear onto the busy street. She stood alone in the rain, holding the physical proof of her freedom. The invisible chains that had choked her for months were gone, shattered by a man who demanded order. As she looked at the rust-colored stain on the contract, she knew she had simply traded a rusty chain for a titanium one. The Tuesday dinner rush came and went in a blur of clinking silver, roasted garlic, and loud conversation. Sarah moved automatically, her body completing tasks while her mind remained stranded in the alleyway. She kept reaching into her apron pocket, her fingers brushing against the rough paper of the loan contract. It was real. She was safe, but safety felt entirely different than she had imagined. It didn't feel light. It felt incredibly heavy, weighted down by the violent currency that had purchased it. At exactly 11:40 p.m., the atmosphere in the restaurant shifted. It was a subtle drop in barometric pressure, a sudden stilling of the air. Sarah looked up from the sink. Dominic walked through the front doors. He was immaculate, wearing a tailored black suit that absorbed the dim lighting of the dining room. He didn't glance at the host stand. He didn't look at the other patrons. He walked straight to booth 4 and sat down in the shadows. Sarah dried her hands on a towel. She didn't pour his Macallan immediately. Instead, she took a deep breath, walked out from behind the bar, and crossed the empty floor toward his table. She slid into the booth across from him. Dominic watched her, his dark eyes analyzing the steady set of her shoulders. He noticed the absence of trembling in her hands. He noticed the sharp, defiant clarity in her eyes that had been buried under weeks of exhaustion. "You got the delivery," he stated quietly. "I did." Sarah folded her hands on the table. "Kyle is gone. Kyle is no longer a variable in your existence," Dominic corrected. He leaned back against the leather, resting one arm along the back of the booth. "And the men who disturbed your Sunday afternoon have been educated on the consequences of crossing boundaries." "Educated," she repeated bitterly. "Is that what you call it?" "I call it pest control." Dominic's voice held absolutely no remorse. "Do not bleed for wolves, Sarah. They would have stripped you down to the bone and sold the pieces. I merely showed them a bigger set of teeth." She knew he was right. The cynical survivor in her knew that men like Ricky and his boss only understood one language. Dominic was fluent in it. "What do I owe you?" she asked, cutting straight to the absolute center of her anxiety. "You told me you didn't want money. You told me you wanted order. You have your order. What happens now?" Dominic didn't answer right away. He reached across the table, his large, warm hand covering both of hers. The contact sent a sharp jolt of electricity up her arms. It wasn't the suffocating, painful grip Kyle used to use. It was heavy, firm, and entirely grounded. "I am eating tonight," Dominic said softly. "I want you to bring 2 menus. I want you to tell your manager you are taking your break, and I want you to eat with me." Sarah blinked, thrown completely off balance. "You want me to eat dinner with you?" "Yes." "That's it? For tonight?" His thumb brushed lightly over her knuckles, a deliberate, possessive stroke. "You have spent months existing in a state of constant survival. You don't know how to do anything else. It is time you learned how to live without constantly looking over your shoulder." "And you're going to teach me?" she challenged, pulling her hands back slightly, though he didn't let go entirely. "By sitting in a dark booth? By showing you that power doesn't always have to bruise." The sincerity in his voice terrified her more than the violence ever could. He wasn't playing a game. He wasn't collecting a momentary debt. He was methodically, purposefully making space for her in his life. Sarah pulled her hands free and stood up. She walked back to the host stand, grabbed 2 heavy leather menus, and walked to the back office. Paul, the manager, was sweating over a spreadsheet. "I'm taking my break," Sarah said flatly. "I'm sitting at booth 4. Paul looked up, ready to argue, his face flushed. Then his eyes flicked past her to the dark suit sitting in the back of the restaurant. The color drained out of Paul's cheeks instantly. Right. Take your time, Sarah. Whatever he needs." She walked back to the booth, tossing 1 menu in front of Dominic and opening her own. "The steak is usually overcooked," she said, her voice dropping into a normal, conversational tone that felt incredibly bizarre given the circumstances. "I'd recommend the sea bass. It's the only thing the chef actually cares about." Dominic's lips twitched into a genuine smile. It completely transformed his face, stripping away the cold mob boss and revealing the man underneath. "The sea bass it is." They ate in silence for the first 20 minutes. It wasn't a tense silence. It was the quiet, evaluating stillness of 2 apex predators circling a new reality. Sarah realized, as she watched him cut his food with precise, economic movements, that she wasn't afraid of him. She was afraid of how easily she was adapting to him. "You aren't working here anymore," Dominic said suddenly, setting his fork down and reaching for a glass of water. Sarah froze, a bite of fish halfway to her mouth. "Excuse me? You heard me." He wiped his mouth with a linen napkin. "You don't belong behind that bar, dealing with men like your manager or drunks who think a $5 tip buys them a conversation. I have rent to pay, Dominic. I have bills. I don't need you managing my career. I am not managing your career. I am changing your environment." He leaned forward, his dark eyes pinning her to her seat. "Tomorrow, a car will pick you up at noon. You are coming to my office. There is a logistics company I own in the garment district. They need an operations manager. The pay is triple what you make here, and you will have an office with a door that locks. You're giving me a job. I am giving you a foundation." Dominic's gaze never wavered. "You asked me to destroy your enemies, Sarah. I did. Now, I am asking you to stop acting like a victim and start acting like someone who belongs in my world." She stared at him, the weight of his words pressing down on her chest. He wasn't asking her to be a kept woman. He wasn't putting her in a cage. He was handing her a weapon and telling her to stand up. "Tomorrow at noon," Sarah agreed softly, the cynicism finally cracking, letting in something that looked dangerously like hope. Black-tinted windows shielded Sarah from the harsh, midday glare as the town car navigated the congested streets of the garment district. Leo drove in absolute silence, his eyes tracking the chaotic flow of delivery trucks and pedestrians with predatory focus. Sarah sat in the expansive back seat, smoothing her hands over the crisp fabric of her new charcoal trousers. She had drained the last of her meager savings that morning at a discount department store, buying a structured blazer and a pair of professional slacks. If she was stepping into Dominic Russo's world, she flatly refused to look like a charity case. The vehicle eased to a halt in front of a massive, renovated brick warehouse. No flashy corporate logos decorated the exterior. There was only a heavy steel security door and a high-definition camera blinking a steady red warning light above the frame. Leo killed the engine and stepped out, opening her door before she could reach the handle. He didn't offer an encouraging smile or a polite platitude. He simply gestured toward the entrance with an open palm. Inside, the building smelled of motor oil, dark roasted coffee, and the sharp ozone tang of heavy machinery. They bypassed a sprawling ground floor where forklifts glided in a silent, perfectly synchronized ballet between towering racks of wooden crates. Sarah watched the warehouse workers. Nobody shouted, nobody slacked off. The same suffocating, absolute order that governed Dominic's personal life clearly dictated his business operations. An industrial elevator carried them to the 4th floor. The heavy metal doors slid open to reveal a stark, minimalist reception area wrapped in floor-to-ceiling glass. Dominic stood behind a massive slab of polished concrete that served as a desk. He wore a crisp white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his forearms, discarding the suit jacket entirely. He was reviewing a thick stack of shipping manifests, a heavy gold pen resting casually between his fingers. When he heard the elevator chime, he looked up. His dark eyes tracked her slow approach, taking in the cheap but sharply tailored blazer, the defiant set of her jaw, and the absolute lack of hesitation in her stride. A flicker of genuine, unmasked approval warmed his stoic expression. "Leo," Dominic said, never breaking eye contact with Sarah. "Leave us." "Yes, boss." Leo turned on his heel and disappeared back into the elevator. The doors slid shut with a soft hiss, leaving them entirely alone. Sarah stopped in front of the desk. She didn't fidget with her sleeves. She didn't wait for permission to speak. "If this is a fake job designed to keep me under your thumb, I'm walking back out that door right now, Dominic. I am not a pet you keep in a glass cage." Dominic set the gold pen down. The metallic click echoed loudly in the cavernous office. "Operations manager is not a vanity title, Sarah. The people on the floor below us move millions of dollars in legitimate textiles and heavy machinery every single week. It is a highly complex, incredibly stressful logistical puzzle. If you fail at it, this company loses money. Real money." He walked around the edge of the desk, closing the physical distance between them. The air in the room instantly felt thicker. "I don't employ dead weight," he continued softly, stopping mere inches from her. "I brought because you spent 2 years managing the volatile, destructive chaos of a violent man. And you survived it. You spent the last 4 months managing the chaotic, high-stress floor of a busy restaurant, and you excelled. You know how to organize. You know how to anticipate problems before they spark, and most importantly, you know how to keep your mouth shut." Sarah held her ground, tilting her chin up to look into his face. "And what about the illegitimate side? Am I supposed to pretend I don't know who you really are?" "You will manage the textiles," Dominic said, his voice dropping into a low, intimate register. "You will ensure the legitimate front of my empire remains entirely unassailable. By keeping the light clean, you allow me to operate effectively in the dark. That is the job. It is dangerous. It requires a spine of steel. Can you do it?" She looked at the man standing over her. He had shattered bones for her. He had erased her crippling debts and permanently removed the monsters hiding in her shadows. Now he was offering her the keys to his kingdom, demanding she stand as his equal rather than cower as his victim. The last lingering ghost of the frightened, exhausted bartender finally died. In her place, something colder, harder, and fiercely independent took a deep, steadying breath. "I need a complete audit of the last 3 months of shipping schedules," Sarah stated, her voice perfectly even. "And I want immediate access to the personnel files of every driver on the payroll. If I am running this floor, I need to know exactly who I am dealing with." Dominic's lips curved into a slow, dangerously beautiful smile. He reached out, his warm, rough hand sliding around the back of her neck, his thumb resting directly over her racing pulse. It was a bold mark of ownership. But for the first time in her life, Sarah didn't want to pull away. "Your office is down the hall," Dominic murmured, leaning in until she could feel the heat of his breath against her skin. "The files are already sitting on your desk. I had Leo compile them this morning." Sarah didn't step back. She leaned subtly into the heavy, grounding weight of his hand. It was a terrifying realization, understanding just how perfectly she fit into the shadow he cast. She had spent months running from violence, only to find her ultimate sanctuary in the arms of the most dangerous man in the city. "Then I suggest you let me get to work, Mr. Russo," she whispered, a fierce spark of defiance lighting up her eyes. "Of course," he replied, finally stepping back, though his dark gaze never left her face. "I expect a preliminary report by dinner. We have a reservation at 8. Sarah turned and walked toward her new office, her heels clicking sharply against the polished concrete floor. The sound was steady, rhythmic, and completely devoid of fear. She wasn't hiding anymore. She had walked through the fire, shed her old life like dead skin, and emerged on the other side. She belonged to the dark now, and as she pushed open the heavy oak door to her office, she realized she wouldn't have it any other way. What a massive shift in Sarah's life. From pouring drinks in a dingy bar and running from her past, to running logistics for Dominic Russo's empire, she has finally stepped into her true power. If you loved watching Sarah shed her victim mentality and embrace the dark, dangerous world of the Mafia, hit that like button right now. Share this video with your fellow romance drama lovers, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss a thrilling story. Drop a comment below. Would you have taken the job with Dominic? See you in the next epic tale.